Okay, so good afternoon. I am Anto Budiarjo and welcome to Monday Live. This is something that we do every Monday afternoon to try and figure out the future of smart buildings and how we're going to improve the built environment. Just in case you wonder who we are listed on mondaylive.org, which is our official website. And just a note that the views expressed here are personal, not of any company or organization. And please do post questions, comments, and other chit chat on the Zoom chat. We want to make this as interactive as possible. And this slide deck, in case you want any of the links on it, is on mondaylive.org. It should be there right now, and any updates will be reflected there. So this being February after the Smarter Summit that we held in Atlanta, we're doing a bit of a sort of a recollection of what happened there, but also mostly having discussions about how we're going to leverage the energy that was clearly there on the summit to move this movement forward. So Smarter Together is our rallying cry from the summit. So looking forward to that. And so this is our agenda, just our normal news and trends, chit chat, and then figure out how we're going to move forward together and open a discussion. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ken to tell us what's going on in automated buildings land.
Thanks, Anto. Lots going on. The reinvented site is going well. We just wrote an article for Connected Contractor, Creative Community Collisions was our takeaway from AHR. That post basically has links to the summit as well as all of our sessions we've captured in YouTube. So it's actually quite a valuable document, got lots of resources in it. We're getting good spin from it. Just the comment there that the ultimate service is not provided by one source, but we're all part of a preferred mosaic of interoperable solutions. This is a path of our future, and AI is a big part of our future. That's kind of chatted about in that particular article, and we're starting to get some take up on that. The other thing is Cochrane has their Controls Con going, and a good thing for automated buildings to do is to take our sponsors and feature their events. And I kind of liking the way that's working because they take them and completely control them on their site. And we just help them promote them and drive people to them. So that's working out well. And of course, that's available for all of our sponsors to do that. We have that gazelle on the front to remind us to be quick and agile. That's a great article talking about ChatGPT and the cost of it, how it's going to be much more costly than Google search, but of course more powerful. And it also, the article suggests that the smaller creative groups are going to have a better spin on this than some of the majors. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. More on that, I came across this demo at the bottom here with the fellow shaking hands with the robot. And what he does is he shows the automatic speech recognition with GPT, and basically the robot speaks back. And so you have this interactive thing of asking the question, and it certainly shows you how a virtual tutor would work, and it's kind of amazing. And again, that feeds on our creative community collisions. It's not just the communities that are in our industry. We're running into all kinds of communities and colliding with them, and it's sort of their jam and our jelly to make something that's we couldn't even conceive just months ago. So pretty interesting time in the industry. We have an example of that in two of our advertisers, Distech and Kobe have combined. Kobe provides a platform, and Distech, as you know, provides controls, and they've worked together And I think that's what you're going to see is creative community forming for a project. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily tied together at the hip forever. It just means that they have the best solution for this particular project. And I think that flexibility is going to be greeted by building owners a lot. Another one that kind of got my attention, an article, and it's navigating the challenges of hybrid working. It's an interesting article. The picture is interesting because the picture is generated with AI. I thought that was kind of interesting. So what they did is they had AI read the newsletter, and this is what AI thought was being talked. This is how it created a picture of what was going on. So it's getting close to thought. It's interesting stuff. But the whole the challenges of this hybrid working is really significant. And one of the biggest problems is that all this intermediate management is stuck in the middle. And basically, once the hybrid really truly works the way it needs to work, they're virtually almost eliminated. So they're kind of throwing sand in the gears, I think, to try and make this confusing. They want everybody back so they can have their people, so they can have their job back looking after people. But that whole piece of the equation is starting to move. So interesting stuff. And of course, empathy is an interesting word too. We have to have empathy for the people. The feedback I'm getting from anybody I've been talking to is that they're having real difficulty getting people back into the office. And numbers when they're going out for new people, the amount of people that are willing to come and work in their office is a small percentage of the total pool. Back to you, Anto.
Yeah, just on the ChatGPT thing there, I noticed that Microsoft, when they announced their partnership with them, their daily downloads went up by nearly 800%, I think, in one day, and rolled on from there and was carrying on climbing because they just decided that they're going to be challenging Google at some stage.
The other part, the article with the Gazelle, the Leaping Gazelle article, talks about it. And 100 million people in January downloaded ChatGPT and gave it a go. I think that is one of the vehicles for us as an industry to attract people to our industry, is just talking about how it could be used in our industry. And I think people might kind of come over and say, what is it you guys really do? So I think it's a worthwhile.
So on that, just reflecting on that interview that you were referring to, that you have a picture on the screen there. Right. I think that's the interview that actually went a little weird, with the AI ending up saying that he loves the guy and all that kind of stuff. It kind of went a little weird. So it's worth digging that up. In fact, John Oliver did a piece on it on his show last week. That's kind of amusing as always. Anyway, but just to point out the point you raised about AI, in the Monday Live planning calls, we have a planning call every week. We're sort of floating the idea that we may dedicate March to talking about AI. And it's early in our discussions, and we haven't sort of decided definitely we're going to do that. But we'd love to hear from you on chat to see if that's a good idea, or how you think we can actually think about the conversation around AI, because it's obviously a big subject. It's also in the hype part of the cycle. So there's a lot of stuff that's new, but how do we take AI and apply it to the building space would be a sort of a great way of thinking about it. I had a couple of slides. One is this sort of thread of conversations that we've had on Monday Live in terms of the conversion of office to residential as a potential of a way for real estate owners to save their bacon, as it were. And there's this interesting article linked here about some of the challenges, some of the legal challenges that they're facing, and this is mostly in the New York market, so it may not be applicable everywhere, but it's actually just sort of interesting to start to think about laws that's got nothing to do with just the basics of converting space from commercial to residential, but some other constraints and rules that could actually make that hard, or some of the rules that needs to be put in place to make that happen. So that's the one on the left. The one on the right is what Ken was referring to, but it's kind of interesting now that a lot of this has sort of come out. It's really sort of clear why Satya Nadella has put a lot of emphasis on AI and specifically on ChatGPT. If you look at the numbers, the search numbers, Bing represents about 3% of the market and Google 93%. And one of the problems that Ken was actually talking about is doing AI questioning costs a lot more. Right, so for Google to change all of their search to AI-driven search actually increases their cost of just computing by like hundreds of billions of dollars. I mean, literally, because they have 93% of the market. And if you look at how that looks to Bing, that only has 3% of the market, their gain out of expending that money is actually much more significant in terms of breaking into the Google search stranglehold, as it were. So I found that sort of interesting, that there's sort of a business rationale of why Microsoft put $10 billion into OpenAI. That was kind of my interpretation of that.
Did you, just out of interest, have you tried OpenGPT today, ChatGPT today?
Not today.
It's quote unquote offline and we're busy. We'll get back to you if you click here. We'll get back to you when we're not so busy. Or go over here, and OpenGPT Plus has now become active to go on a waiting list for $20 a month.
Yeah, I actually got that last week. So they've been sort of feeding that in $20 a month, which is not a lot of money. I mean, it may be worth it. Okay.
I'll pay it.
Yeah. But interesting. So any other thoughts or news or anything else anybody want to bring up before we move on?
No.
Nope. So hearing nothing. So the Smarter Summit, as I mentioned, happened earlier this month, and we're starting to think at least about next year's AHR and the Smarter Summit then, but not too much to talk about other than the fact that it's likely to happen. It will happen. And there is a video of the Atlanta Summit linked here, which you can obviously see on if you go to the mondaylive.org. So we want to talk about moving forward together. I'm hoping to bring on a couple of guests that were at or involved with the summit. But before that, I've put up these slides for the last couple of weeks. I just want to sort of frame the conversation, saying we have some really interesting assets going into the summit, and it's obviously still with us. We have these 5 pillars of action, 5+, that the coalition put together: interoperability, analytics, specification, procurement, workforce, and cross-cutting issues. That's the plus. So that's kind of the sort of organizing principles. We have Monday Live as a weekly gathering place where we can talk about stuff and move things forward. We have the Coalition for Smarter Buildings as a legal entity that we can organize activities and projects and other things. And we have obviously a really interesting growing community of passionate people, our audience and beyond. So we want to sort of do what we can to move forward with this. What do we mean by move forward? Here are some examples of things that we have done and we can do. Obviously, the Div 2525 project is really sort of a good way to think about what we can do. Have a problem that is very clearly a problem in the industry, and attack it from a completely different perspective, which is what we did in that particular project. But we can talk about physical events such as the summit, and we were already talking with Mark earlier about doing something at Haystack Connect, doing social media beyond just LinkedIn, outreach to different channels, influencing building owners, thinking about our own product strategy if we're a vendor, putting together lunch and learn or other sort of educational material, and doing focus podcasts and webinars and whatever you want to think about. So that's kind of just to get the juices going, as it were, in terms of thinking about what we can do. Does anybody have any compelling thought that they want to share before we invite a couple of people on? No. Okay, so hearing none, I'm going to invite Greg Walker. Greg is the CEO of CABA. CABA was one of the supporting organizations of the summit. And I'm also going to invite, I'll bring them on both together, Tim Vogel from KMC. Tim is a great advocate for moving this industry forward. He does a podcast, but he was also at the summit and shared some of his thoughts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop my share and ask maybe Greg if you can go first, or Tim. No, Greg. Let me ask Greg to sort of give us your thoughts about where we are, what obviously happened in Atlanta, the summit and other activities. You are now in charge of CABA. And give us your thoughts about where we are and how we can sort of move things forward in this industry.
Yeah, thanks, Eto. I think, well, with we were definitely there. We were there in Atlanta. We have it was a couple of us there at the show. We had a booth and we attended the Smarter Summit. One of the things that our board did is we met and did a strategic planning session at CES, and it was like a 2-day long, basically think tank roundtable to determine what CABA should be as an organization going forward. And I think we came in to do really focus on two main things. One is focusing more on sort of smaller type research projects, and then focusing on things like podcasts, a different way to consume data. And then we were basically reaching out to different groups to try to get more podcast hosts and more podcast guests. So that was one thing that we focused on, and the other one was education and training. So really around education. So we're in the process of putting together, or at least investigating, some sort of training and education for the industry, and we're in the very early stages. So we're trying to figure out what that training would look like, and then who would be involved. There has been talks about having maybe a ESG, or possibly focusing on integrators, focusing on contractors, and really both the large building component and also the residential, and saying there's a need for particular groups to get educated from a high level perspective in education and training. So we met with Melissa and her group, and presented a proposal to the board, and we're sort of gathering the feedback at this point from the industry, and what everyone would like to see in terms of an education and training program, whether it's going to be a certification a course where you get an actual certification at the end, or if it's just continuing education credits. We're not really sure at this point, but we're going to be at least investing in some resources into this in the future, in the hopes to get new members, and get some smaller players involved, and really focus on really the workforce component of education and training, both residential and large building. So those are the two things that we're sort of working on as an organization. And I think Anto, you reached out and possibly doing a podcast on the post Smarter Summit, and contributing that way, and getting others from Monday Live involved in that as well. So we'd welcome that, and we'll be in touch later. But I guess I'll leave it at that. And what is everyone's thoughts about education and training, and what the industry needs in terms of a training course or anything like that? So I'll stop there.
Anyone want to respond to Greg?
Yeah, good, Greg. It's Roger Woodward here in the UK, but we have a trade association here called the BCIA that's actually got training courses, which I'm sure they'd be quite happy to share. And people get certified for it. And now people, when they're looking for jobs, they're sponsoring that apprenticeships as well as that. And there's a combination of all the controls companies, system integrators and suppliers and things that actually pay for the trade association. But I'd be happy to put you in touch with them because they're already structured courses, which were originally kind of, I think, donated a little bit by Siemens, but then they've been modified and updated and things. So maybe something that's useful for you.
Yeah, I'm definitely be open to that, and that's exactly what we're looking to do. But we want to make sure that we keep it up to date and keep on renewing the content as the industry progresses, and then we have a lot of the big players on our board, like the Schneider, Siemens, Honeywell, Johnson Controls groups that we could, if we do roll out something, the idea is we would hope that some of those players would get involved and have some of their staff do some of the training as well.
Certainly
So,
anything that's on automated building is available to you. And, you know, so from Atlanta and Vegas, we have YouTubes of those sessions and stuff. So if you want to reformat any of that, let's talk.
Sure.
But education and training, obviously, there's a very broad sort of range of what you can put into those category. Workforce, we've talked a lot about, and that's obviously Melissa's focus, and a lot of our conversations focus around that. But sort of things like educating building owners and educating people about issues like cybersecurity and, you know, all of these different things, which is not sort of education to get a job, as it were, but education to actually understanding. Is that part of the scope of what you're trying to do, Greg?
It could be. I think that most likely the next step would be maybe you can work with Melissa and her group to survey our board and get some feedback on what they would like to see the training on. So I guess there's two different aspects of it. There's getting the training, and then there's who's the training for, and then both of them are really up in the air at this point. So I think we just at the end of that session, we just came up with, we want to do training. There's a need for training. Everyone's hearing about the need for training, but we haven't really dug down too far into it. And I know it's been a little bit of time, but we haven't really got together with some working groups at this point. But that's the plan, is to figure out what the target is. We can't do everything, and we also want to make sure that we're not sort of cannibalizing other groups. Like, so if another group has a good cybersecurity course, we don't want to reinvent the wheel and compete with anybody. The goal is to really just move the needle forward and push the industry forward and get new people involved. But I think from the general 10,000 foot level, it was there seems to be a need with integrators and contractors. Is really particularly contractors, which was really a target group that we're hearing that are looking for education and training. Like, maybe if you're an electrical contractor, you're in there, you're doing a job, you're doing the work, and you don't have any experience in intelligent buildings, and you sort of leave money on the table, and then you just walk away. And as an example, so something like that would be like, how do we work with this these other players in the space that may not be intelligent building specialists, or maybe they are, and they're looking to expand their skill set.
I was impressed at Atlanta with the Smart Building Academy, which is one of our sponsors, and they put on a session for us. One of their things that caught my attention is their time to market. All of our training programs have they're kind of vague. And some of their stuff is you start here and you go for so many weeks, and when you're finished, you can actually get a job, doing that. I think that has a lot of attraction anyway. So they've been doing some amazing stuff. I've been pretty impressed with them.
Melissa, I think you were going to say something, Melissa.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure that, Greg had an opportunity to share all of his thoughts, but I think one of the really interesting and productive approaches that Greg is taking with his board is every organization has limited resources and time, and where is the best use of CABA's time for its particular audience. And some of the work that we're looking at doing with their board is to understand what the real needs of their audiences that are different from what else is out there, you know, and how do they differentiate? Because the problem across the industry isn't that we don't have any training. It's not that there isn't anybody out there teaching something that's good. It's like boiling the ocean. There's so much choice out there. There's so much out there. How do we tweezer it to get it to the audience and help them get what they need out of it in the right amount of time? And Greg has a unique situation where they've got the residential audience. It's pretty substantial. Greg, what share of your board really focuses on the residential as opposed to commercial?
It's probably, I don't know the exact number. It's kind of a hard question to answer, but I think it's probably more like maybe 40% residential, 60% large building. The large building component is always, there's always usually a little bit more funds that are available there, and we've always been pretty strong on the large building side. And then we have companies that do both, right? So it's like, it's hard to say.
So
So that
Greg,
is a nuance that makes it interesting.
Greg, this is Steve Fay. Good to meet you. So two comments to picking up on what Melissa was saying about the number of training options that are already out there. And there are clearly resources and companies doing the training. I think what I'm seeing is on the, like you mentioned, on the contractor side, an ignorance of what is available to help them. Okay. So there's, I think that I'm suggesting maybe the role for CABA might be more on the education side. And not just for the contractors and building owners to let them know what's available. And particularly in the situation we're in right now, where there's a tremendous shortage of talent. And, you know, when I talk to contractors, they get it. They get that they don't have people, and they struggle to find people. So there's some really good stories to tell to address that specific problem. Okay. But, and then at that point, you can point them, here's company A, company B, company C that you can look to actually deliver the result. But talk to them at the level that they're experiencing, which is, how do I find people? How do I bring new people into my organization, particularly those that are in the 20-something, 30-something category? How do I do that, right? So I think that's one area. And then the other is the subject that we talk about here on Monday Live, which is the lack of awareness in the general public about what we do. So, you know, we're trying to attract talent and from the up and coming generation who has no clue that there's actually something fun to do in buildings. They have no idea. And so what can we do to educate people who normally wouldn't ask that question about what makes a building smart? They don't even realize the buildings can be smart. They don't even realize why buildings need to be smart. Okay. Right. So there's this general need to educate and inform the general, I'll call it not this group, everybody outside our group, who about what we do and why it's necessary and why it's valuable. So that's going to have a positive effect in two ways. Those who are potentially in a position to influence making their building smart are going to start asking for it when they realize what's possible. And the younger generation coming up is going to actually might even consider coming to work in our world, right? So I encourage you to think, because the other point about all this group talks about all the time, we struggle from how to market what we do. How do we get the message out? We're not in a strong position. CABA has a terrific history, has major companies on your board who can help in that regard, and I would love to see them get involved in this. But we've gotten so insular that we've haven't taken this as an opportunity to look outside ourselves and say, what can we do to influence the market as a whole to look at us in all the ways I just suggested?
I think that's a great suggestion as a more of a function of a clearinghouse of what can be done, but also public targeted potential education. It's interesting. I mean, the other thing I was going to mention as well is that in terms of coordinating what kind of education gets developed, obviously we don't want overlaps. We don't want too many people doing the same things. And you know, if I consider the list of assets that we have a lot of assets, including Monday Live, sort of using this as a clearinghouse to actually understand what's needed could be useful, as well as the coalition and others. So that's great. I want to move over to Tim Vogel. Tim Vogel's with KMC, and Tim, I think many of us have known Tim for many years. He was at the summit, and he also runs I don't know if it's a monthly podcast or what frequency, but let you speak to what you're doing, your reflection on the summit, and how you think that's going to change how you sort of proceed going forward.
Sure. So first of all, KMC Controls, I manage our cloud-based software, and we're trying to bring smart building technology and be as interoperable as possible, right? So agnostic in the building level, agnostic in the cloud level, trying to work with everyone to build and orchestrate those perfect smart building solutions that each individual end user has their own idea of what they're trying to do. In terms of the podcast, we are in our second season, and every season is 12 weeks long, and we release it once a week. So I think we just released our 4th or 5th episode. And Steve, I believe it was you. So thank you for being a part of that. And anyone else on here that has been a part of it so far. And shout out to Greg for inviting me to come and be on the CABA podcast early on in that project. So from the Smarter Summit standpoint, I thought it was a really great conversation. I wrote down here that it was very vendor friendly because all the vendors were so friendly. We were just able to have these conversations, and it was very just kind of, lack of a better term, it was open. I mean, we went in and we said, well, we're doing this and we're working with this, and interoperability is important, right? So then we should probably talk as if it's important, because we got to figure it out. How are you doing it? Here's how we're doing it. Took a lot of pictures with people. So thanks for everyone that took a picture with me also. Especially Melissa. I cornered Melissa at like 11 o'clock one night in the hotel lobby. I was like, oh, Melissa, can I get a picture with you? She's like, how about tomorrow? But anyways, it was very, very, very kind of her. I wrote several things down here that impressed me about the Smarter Summit in particular. The frameworks and the paradigms that are being pushed forward, whether it's the Smarter Stack or the 5 pillars of a smart building from C4SB. Those are all very helpful to tie our conversations around up and down the stack of conversations. If we're talking to end users, that gives people these firm handlebars to hold on to while you're trying to talk to them about what smart buildings are. And sometimes they just need that kind of anchoring and that foundation of how we're now going to talk about how we're going to make your building smart. And it's going to take all these different parts and pieces, and it's not going to be a one size fits all. What are really ultimately then your goals? And so the why at the top of the Smarter Stack is really beneficial for that. We talked about the buzz and the excitement. I'm happy to say that continued on through all of AHR. I mean, show of hands if anyone else felt that way. Very, very encouraging. I feel like, the buzz of the Smarter Summit was nice because we talked about supply and demand, and people are having these smarter conversations. It's not people dipping their toes in the water. They're saying, let's go and execute jobs. But even on the show floor, that mentality was continuing over. And so you talk about APIs and people aren't as concerned about that anymore. So from a demand standpoint, not to bring in procurement, but from a demand standpoint, that's it's just happening more and more. We're continuing to educate, we're pulling people into the conversation, but the boots on the ground conversations are happening at the building and project level, which is nice. The workforce discussion was really good, and I don't want to belabor it, but I did write down here on one of the slides, it talked about the choice and variety of training options. I'm becoming, one, less ignorant of what's there, and two, more excited about this new content that's coming out, because it really does fit people up and down the stack or the vertical in our industries, which is good. And I think the more we have that, the more we can tell stories, which is part of the reason for the podcast, but the more we can tell stories about what people's career journeys are, I think the more people are going to be drawn into it. It's like, oh man, this is a mixture of technology and staying up to speed, and always have that eye out of what's going to be 10, 15 years down the road. But you also have to have a pretty firm understanding of 20 years in the past, because that's going to be out there for another 10, 15 years. So all that to say, it was an exciting conversation. I think it was absolutely relevant. I think that's why people liked it so much, because even afterwards, there was just a lot of positivity around that. So I thank the group that put it together and for the opportunity to be there. And I think the conversations only continue when we continue to have them. So we could each do that. Monday Live's a great forum to do that. Let's continue to find those forums.
So any specific action on your part, other than continuing the conversation forward, which is great, you can think that you can inspire or initiate?
Specific action would probably have to do with some of the conversations we had. So, the people that I was meeting, hands I was shaking, and follow-up conversations that were scheduled. Whether that's an API conversation or just, hey, let me see exactly what your platform is so that I could understand it better and see if there's even a fit. Right. So, I made the comment at the end of the summit about, if interoperability is really important, then we as vendors need to be more open, not only with our platform, but also with our data, and go in and solve these orchestrated smart solutions together, recognizing the pie is large and we could each get our slice, and we're all happy because we're all trying to make money, and while also propagating new technologies and all that. So just Great. Being willing, without signing an NDA, to have a conversation and do a demo of your platform, I think is, step one. Go do that thing.
Right. Open it up to additional comments, thoughts from the group.
Well, I want to say that I love the topic and the priority of your podcast. I think it's great to have more people telling the stories. One of the things that we're suggesting is for people that have educational programs is to link more to things like your podcast, so that there's a better connection with people that are entering the industry to know the stories of the people that have come before them. We don't really have a great way to do career development out of colleges and universities, and the career advisors there don't know anything either. So it's great that you're doing that. I'd love to hear what we didn't talk about at the summit that you'd love to hear next year. We've got a lot of talk about stuff, but what would you like to see next year, and what would you like us to start talking about throughout 2023?
Great. That's a question for me or for the whole group?
Well, we talk about it a lot, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, I'm not prepared to answer that, Melissa, because I didn't think of it in those terms, but I appreciate the on-the-spot question. No, I think it's a continued conversation around what it really means to be interoperable. And what that means is you're going to be on a phone call with 10 vendors, with the end user, and you're all going to have to be working together in a very open and public forum. You're going to be sharing the same Slack channels with each other. You're going to be, passing on API information and setting aside, your side comments about how their API works and your API works. And it's just how, how does that work? And how do you do that? And some of it is you just have to set aside, that competitive nature once the project's, going. But, that's going to be the way forward. I mean, that's been some of the most exciting projects. And those are the ones that I think ultimately scale, because now you have enough people with enough know-how. So I think that would be interesting, particularly in an industry that is, there's camps, there's tribes. So how do we get those camps and tribes to work together?
That's a
It's the
great
whole,
comment.
the whole smarter together, right? That
Right.
encapsulate what you just said.
So Tim, sort of a follow-up on that, protocols are the nice thing about protocols like back that they're documented. There's lots of documentation that can guide you as to how to use it. APIs, another animal altogether, because it's completely undocumented effectively. And so we in the DIV 2525 framework, we actually started talking about this in the framework document itself, trying to more or less define what we consider to be a good API, a well-written API. And so knowing that you're involved with software and no doubt have APIs in your system architecture, what are your thoughts about how to take this conversation ahead, and to what extent we can, because we would like to see the industry become much, much more open, if you will, in terms of how they communicate their APIs. Here's what it is, here's how it works, here's what it's capable of doing. So we don't have to go digging through phone numbers and email addresses and trying to find stuff out. Just tell us right out of the gate.
Yeah.
Right?
I would say that there's probably two key aspects. One is documentation and making it public and available.
Right.
So if you want to see Commander's API, go to api.kmccommander.com. There it is. That's what you could do. And I think I would encourage anyone that has an API to go and do that. But in order to do that, you also have to be the second one, and that's disciplined. And this is where, I don't think anyone is perfect. We're certainly learning as a company and as a team, but when you go and make a change to that API, you cannot go and break everything else that's happened.
Right.
And that means you also have to be disciplined in how you document that and communicate that ahead of time. So open and supported APIs and discipline and how you go about doing it. And how do you document and prove discipline? It's maybe like an ISO standard or some credentialing.
We
That's the
certainly could
manufacturer in me.
we could force everybody to put 5-star ratings on their APIs and let the marketplace start giving likes and dislikes, right?
Yeah. Wow, that would be some open customer feedback, that's for sure.
Yep. Any other thoughts, guys, on this subject? Because I think this is critical, one of the critical pieces to what we're doing.
Yeah, or any other subject with Greg and Tim. Great guests that we have.
Yeah, just Tim, it was great meeting you on the panel that we did at the open.
You as well. We got lost together, didn't we?
We did in the end, yeah. We tried to find out getting out of the conference area late. That was kind of fun, but yeah, I did take to heart your point about one of the things I think the forum did well was none of the presentations were manufacturer centric. We weren't. No one was really trying to give a manufacturers, and that's one of the challenges you have with a lot of these conferences, right? Is that the panels put together and the people give a presentation, which is really a marketing pitch on a product, and most people see through that pretty quickly. And I think we were very genuine in the messages that we were given that weren't connected. And I think that's what really kept the crowd, there, and which is it's a good feedback, right? That people really do like honest, genuine discussion and not a marketing pitch wrapped up in a presentation, and that, I think that was one of the feedbacks I had afterwards in the sessions, that everyone was saying like, yeah, there was no one had an agenda per se. It was just an open discussion.
Well, and shout out to Mark Peacock, because you kept that crowd engagement and conversation moving, and you kept it moving. It's good.
That was tough because I didn't expect as many people to get involved as much as I did, We saw-
Appreciate that. Appreciate it. Tough crowd. Tough crowd. No, I'm just kidding. Appreciate it.
I wonder,
Well, when
Steve,
when you're cutting off the panelists because we got more crowd people, that was, I mean,
Yeah,
it just
that's-
showed, what was the purpose of it? It wasn't necessarily to grandstand the panelists. It was to involve the crowd and have a real honest and open conversation. And I don't feel like anyone really held back. There was positives, there was, criticisms, and that's what made it genuine and authentic. And the reason I'm going to sign up and go next year.
And to your comment, Anno, about you said nobody had an agenda. I actually disagree with that. I think everybody had an agenda of moving the industry forward. It was not a selfish agenda, which is the norm.
That's what I mean. There was no hidden agenda. There was no self-serving agenda. It was more how to keep everyone moving forward. And
I was going to go on and say, I wonder whether the need for some sort of central body to actually place your API or whatever it may be, because really open is open protocols, it's open platforms, but it's also open distribution. And whilst Tim's a lovely guy, if I fell out with him, there could be issues there from other companies, where you're trying to get access to stuff. Where if there was somewhere where people could lodge it and at least it was accessible, for distribution, that may be another way of kind of where people need to actually.
I can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah.
That's what we do.
Yeah.
Right. So all of these gentlemen on the screen here, we have relationships with, and they make a variety of their products available to the general public. So it's moving that way. And even years ago when we were just doing a lot of kind of LawnWorks related product, one of the things that we sort of latched on to for a bit of a tagline was, more LawnWorks products, better open systems. Well, take out the word LawnWorks now and just say more open products, better open systems, right? Mm-hmm. So availability, one of the ways that manufacturers and vendors lock up markets has to do with channels and channel distribution and territories and so forth too. So I've always been a firm believer in a much more open market in terms of availability and making products available for better competitive bidding, right? I know that's not a popular thing to say with a lot of contractors who like their territories. And I understand that too. If I were in their shoes, I would want that as well. But at the same time, part of being open, interoperable is that availability of products to put into any project, no matter where it's located, right?
It's interesting, Tracy, in the UK, it's why 74% of the industry now is done by system integrators, not the larger manufacturers, because initially it was the open protocols, then it was the platforms, and then it was distribution. You can only get it there because somehow there was a lock-in for service afterwards. Whereas, that kind of broke down the industry because people just said, I don't want to be locked in. I need to go somewhere where even if I've got this guy who does it, who bought it from an open chain somewhere, I can still go to others if I fall out with him and I have options.
So Rick, do you want to chime into this conversation in terms of how the coalition sort of sees a lot of these sort of issues and helping things like APIs and everything else we've talked about?
Yeah, over the last couple of years, we identified different barriers, and that's what the 5 pillars came from. And we started, convening people to kind of go to work and address those 5 pillars or 5 barriers that were, sort of issues. And I think going forward, we're going to modify some of that as the coalition and bring together people to kind of focus on what are now the sort of the new barriers or the newly identified barriers. And it's really cool to hear consensus around APIs need to be better, or business models could be more open in terms of XYZ as a service. So the coalition is listening because, frankly, most of you are part of the coalition. And we're thinking of now how to focus some of the efforts of this 501c3 on this next set of barriers. But that, and the expanding the community is the other big part about, we've talked about that a couple of times over the last few weeks. And we're seeing that with more voices coming in to be part of this conversation. People of different backgrounds and different education and different viewpoints, all being part of the conversation. But that's kind of where the coalition sees its role, is take on barriers, expand the community. And then perhaps there is some sort of certification things that CABA and others, we can talk about. It's like, how do we stamp with a seal of approval? It's like the community's approval of certain approaches. But that's it's just exciting to hear so much conversation around these, sort of forward thinking, refreshing thoughts.
Great. Thanks, Rick. Greg, any sort of follow-up thoughts after hearing this in terms of what more we can do with each other, with Monday Live, with the coalition and CABA? And I think Steve put it earlier, CABA has a very significant footprint, obviously for good reason. It's been around for a long time. Any thoughts about how we can step things up?
Well, I see CABA as really being a sort of a conduit to evangelize some of the good work from Monday Live, and those that are on the call here, either through podcasts, being guests or hosts, or being involved in even a think tank. We do quarterly think tanks on different topics. If somebody wants to get involved in something like that, let me know and we can organize one on a certain topic. I think that's the way to go. And just to be clear, we're not looking at creating or sort of creating the educational program ourselves. We're looking at really just partnering with those individuals and those groups that specialize in that. We're really an association first, just like we don't do research ourselves. We partner up and do RFPs with research firms, and then they would conduct the research on our behalf. So we're very agnostic sort of approach to this education.
That's great. Thank you. So Jim, you've been very quietly listening. I'm going to pick on you to kind of give your thoughts about what we've discussed here today. And
good. Well, I think that a lot of the comments that were mentioned about the summit have been spot on. I think we've spent several weeks talking about it now. My interest is in some of the comments that Roger made, et cetera. There's a lot actually going on in the industry now. If you were an outsider, you might not see it, but the acceleration of the decline of the large companies' branches and the transition to independence is accelerating very rapidly right now. And I think that brings a lot of opportunities. But I still think that even with the outreach to Greg and other communities, that we suffer from still talking to ourselves. And I'd like to figure out how we can enlarge the tent. And some of the outreach with Division 2525 has been very important, because that has actually brought a reasonable number of very high level consultants into the business. But we need to go down from there. And I'm still very interested in going up as well to the enterprise with ESG discussions. So once again, great foundation, a lot of great stuff, but I think there are a number of powerful directions that we can grow in, and that's my interest.
thank you. That's great.
I'll give a shout out to Stephen Crow. If anyone knows Stephen, perhaps he's been on Monday Live before. He's now with a company called Netix AI. And he had this idea sometime last year where he talked about something kind of like a Got Milk campaign, where milk producers got together and they created a campaign to the broader audience. Go RVing was the same way. A highly competitive market of private companies and public companies came together, created a coalition, if you will. And from that, they put together the Go RVing campaigns that we've seen over the last, 10, 20 years. So mass appeal, broad appeal, where that fits, I'm not sure, but I think best way to do is to do it together.
I definitely think if you did something like that, it should definitely focus on something with green technologies, ESG, and greenhouse gases, things like that, where I think you'd get intelligent buildings come into the mainstream through that green technology and greenhouse gases and that sort of thing with the general population, because that's the buzzword, that's the trend, and I think it's not in a control system or anything like that.
I would advocate for a multi-pronged. I definitely say that would be part of it, but I think just talking about the technology itself, I mean, that draws people, come and be a part of new technology that's really emerging in a field, because people's motivations are completely different. That was something else I didn't talk about, was that I felt like there was an open discussion around priorities and how that can vary between each individual, and combined each of, however we face the industry, each of those positions together, I think just make for a larger call. So yes, and.
So this may be a project that we can talk about creating I don't know what to call it, because we don't have a thing yet, but I think we were talking earlier about educating the public, and that's really what you're talking about here, Tim. And that will be hugely valuable in terms of for the value proposition of the technology, but also for attracting workforce and a whole bunch of other sort of reasons. So it'll be interesting to see if we can initiate something. Obviously, those kinds of things, those kinds of projects require potentially significant amount of funding, right? But you got to start somewhere. You got to start with either a message or a theme or an idea or a project. Maybe we can do that as part of this group between us, people that's on the call.
Yeah, I'll go back to Greg's point though that he made earlier too with the ESG, and for a while I kind of discounted the ESG as just being another label on stuff that we're doing, but still the message I got clearly from last week's call with the younger ladies that we had on the call, that that is a big deal to that generation, and it's something that we actually can impact. It's something we can physically do, and I just don't think we're leveraging that message strong enough to that generation, right? Good, bad, or otherwise, as far as your beliefs are concerned, but from a message that is resonating with them, that's something, if they feel that the technology we provide can make an impact on that, it's a draw.
Yep.
I'm going to drop off, but Anto, until we figure out what to call it, for now, let's just call it the Smart Milk Campaign for us.
Smart. Okay, we'll go with that. That'll work as a working title, as they say.
Yep.
Okay. Well, let's bring this to a close. Greg, Tim, thank you very much for joining us. Hopefully you'll join us again in the future and continue this conversation. Thank everybody in the audience for being here. And for the panelists as well. We'll put a video of this up on YouTube tomorrow or Wednesday at the latest. Otherwise, have a great week and see you next week. Bye-bye all.
See you guys.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.